Viewers, this is Sri Iyer, your host from PGurus, and I have with me today Rajeev Srinivasan, a commentator, an author, and a technologist. Rajeev, welcome to PGurus channel.
Sri, thank you very much. It's great to be here as usual. Your channel is one of the most informative and interesting channels out there on YouTube as a whole.
Thank you, Rajeev. Thanks for those kind words. And viewers, I cannot emphasize more the need for you to subscribe to our channel. We would like to have more subscribers because that helps us to essentially pitch the channel as a viable place to communicate for subject matter experts. As you can see, we are getting more experts every month. Rajeev was a recent addition, I think 2 months old or so, and Rajeev has already been with us 4 or 5 times already, and we hope that we can keep up this frequency. And also, please don't forget to donate. It's a request. I'm not going to say you shall donate. If you can donate, much appreciated. We're not going to put any limits on the amount that we would like to have you donate to us. It is just that it takes a fair amount of time to line up all these things, and we are investing into equipment, hardware to make these things sound even better, to make it almost like CNN quality. Remember that half the time, the two participants are half the world away. So there is a little bit of lag, there's a little bit of technology to climb, but be that as it may, all combined in good time, we hope to have this thing as a very, very good place that you can come and say, let me find out about XYZ. And sure enough, there is a video about that. There is a subject matter expert weighing in on that. Okay, that is my spiel for today. Rajeev, what do you make of the Minister of External Affairs, Subramaniam Jaishankar's speech that he gave recently?
Sri, I think it was a very interesting and insightful speech. This was the Ramnath Goenka annual lecture, the 4th version that Sri Jaishankar delivered, I think, about a week ago. It has cost a significant amount of soul-searching and commentary in India because, in a way, it's emphasizing that we have a new India in foreign affairs. That is to say that we have now reached a point where we can look back on the last 70 years of our foreign policy and look at the mistakes that we made, look at the phases that we went through, and look at the current situation with fresh eyes and see how we can differentiate ourselves moving forward. And to me, what was most interesting about the speech was the subtexts that I just mentioned about the phases, and he also talked about a basket of opportunities and threats today, and divided that up into several categories. But apart from that, I was struck by the fact that many things that we teach in business school about strategy seem to be quite applicable here. And I'll just mention one or two. One is my favorite about strategic intent. This is something that the great management guru, the late C.K. Prahlad of Michigan, came up with, talking about how entities, basically companies in his perspective, have long-term intents. There is also the strategy guru, Michael Porter from Harvard, who had taken this whole concept of the competitive advantage of companies and turned that into the competitive advantage of countries. So there is that as well. So there seems to be this possibility of taking business ideas and applying them to nations, their fortunes as well. The other part which struck me is that the whole idea of phases is very relevant in business. And I have been teaching for years about how if you look at industries that have gone through phase changes, that is a significant change from one phase to the other, where a new hardware performance level comes in, for example, or new users come in, or other things like that. It turns out that the leader in one phase almost never is the leader in the next phase. There seems to be this problem of what's called the innovator's dilemma, that people who are winning at any point in time then get addicted to that win, and therefore the incumbent can easily be dislodged by some insurgent who comes in and does something different and changes the playing field. And that is something I think is implicit in Sri Jaishankar's speech, because he's talking about how there are these powers, and what can India as a potential insurgent do to change the rules of the game. So I thought it was a very exciting speech in terms of how it straddles the differences between industry and nation and their strategies, as well as the nods to the fact that we have gone through a number of experiences for which we need to learn quite a bit. And if I may, let me just tell you the 4 or 5 phases that he mentioned. I'd written them down somewhere here.
Yeah.
The first phase he talked about was, let me take a look at my notes.
Sure.
He said it was 1947 to 1962. This was a phase of great optimism because there were all these countries that had become newly independent, and India was in a position where it thought of itself as the leader of the non-aligned movement.
Right.
And there was all kinds of euphoria about that.
I thought Nehru took it ridiculous lengths because I think we talked about this once before, that in 62 he visits America, and Kennedy is trying to strike up a friendship with him, and he's deliberately pushing him away. And then just a few months later, the Chinese attack, and he is sending these SOS calls to America. So please continue.
Right. I agree with you that Nehru underestimated the Chinese, for example. Plus, he overestimated himself. He thought he was like, I don't know, Emperor Ashoka, who had come back and the Panchashila and all that. So it was self-delusion. And that phase of self-delusion and self-importance ended in 1962, as you correctly pointed out. And then the next phase is from 62 to 71, where it's sort of recovery from that debacle against China, which we, in fact, could have done a lot better with had it not been for 2 things. One is very poor defense ministry strategy by the esteemed Krishna Menon, and the fact that India, as you said, didn't seek friendship and support from other countries early enough. And we could, in fact, have stopped the Chinese at that time because they had just been through a period of, revolution and starvation. And I don't know if you realize this, I read somewhere that if we had only used our Air Force more successfully or more sensibly, we could have potentially won that 1962. And it's had tremendous negative consequences. For example, Tibet and the water problem, how Tibet controls the water in most of Asia. For example, the Mekong and the Irrawaddy to the east of us, and then the Indus and Brahmaputra. These are huge problems. But anyway, so that's the second phase from 1962 to 71. And 71, of course, we had a major military confrontation with Pakistan. And so 1971 to 91 is the period of regional assertivity, also where we had that, the ability to bifurcate Pakistan in 1971. But then we also screwed up with the IPKF, that misadventure in Sri Lanka, and the beginning of the US-Pakistani-China axis, and the worst of all, the collapse of the Soviet Union, which had been our friend all along. So that leads to the next phase after 1991, which is the unipolar phase, where America destroyed the world as a colossus. And then we started making some moves to engage with the US and come up with tactics and strategy to deal with the situation. And we started talking to Israel, we started doing our Luke East, etc. And 1998 starts the next phase, where we unequivocally declared ourselves to be a nuclear power and dared the rest of the world to deal with it. And they did. Despite a lot of noise from various quarters, everybody kind of came to the conclusion that, well, this is a fait accompli. India has its nukes. And that gave us a fair amount of opportunity, as the MEA says, of being sort of a balancing power. And we came up with the nuclear deal and the BRICS, the whole story about BRICS. And so this lasted till about 2014. And then after 2014, there is this whole story of China's momentum, the American sort of withdrawal in Trump's years, the idea they're getting out of Afghanistan, and on the other hand, this sort of pivot to the Asia Pacific, which they renamed Indo-Pacific, which has not been as powerful as we thought. That is this pivot. And then the EU is turning inwards. Japan is now acquiring a greater say in things, and the Quad and so forth. So that's the current situation. So these are the 6 phases that he divided things into, which I thought was pretty good because our opportunities, our strengths, our weaknesses, the threats, etc., are all fairly different in these 6 phases.
Wonderful to see that he had employed modern techniques such as SWOT. And now the one thing that I have to tip my hat to President Prime Minister Modi is his external policy has been very muscular. He has been able to, take on Pakistan. He's also now not afraid to show Turkey and Malaysia where they are. I mean, so he is able to sort of respond back sharply, which is a good thing. And also, I think that in Maldives and Sri Lanka and some of the smaller countries who are all being either wooed by Pakistan or China, I think they are now all looking to India, although there has been some damage in these countries. Now, going forward, what do you feel has been the performance of this current Minister of External Affairs?
Well, Dr. Jaishankar has been in his job for only about 5 months.
So we need to give him more time. Okay.
We have to give him more time. However, he's a veteran. He's been in this business for a very long time as a bureaucrat, right? So he's been an ambassador to various countries, and therefore he brings a wealth of knowledge, and also his family background. His father, Mr. Subramaniam, was one of India's leading strategic experts. And his brother, Sanjay, I believe, is a historian at Oxford or something, although I think he's a bit of a lefty. However, Subramaniam, he also has a Japanese wife, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
so
yes, he does. Yeah.
Right, which is great because, Japan is potentially our best civilizational ally. So I think Jaishankar does bring a significant amount of knowledge as well as capability to the picture. And if he's aligned well with, as you said, and I like that word you used, muscular. We have to be a muscular country. This whole thing about rolling over and playing dead is for the birds. And especially as India's economy gains muscularity, because it's very, very likely that in 10 years we'll be the number 3 economy in the world, only behind the US and China as we overtake Germany and then Japan. We have to have a commensurate geopolitical heft. We can't be a shrinking violet as we did all these years.
Yes.
We have to, in addition, build up our military. And that is very relevant to what you said a minute ago. Because China, after having successfully made the South China Sea into their private lake, and that's exactly how they're acting. We own it. They have drawn this 9-dash line, which essentially takes the entire South China Sea and makes it their own. Now they're moving into the Indian Ocean, and that's where Maldives, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh, and of course Nepal, although it's not in the Indian Ocean, the moves that they're making into those countries essentially are stepping on India's toes, because this is our backyard. The Indian Ocean is in effect our sea, our lake, although we have not been assertive about it. I think the time has come for us to be very, very assertive and create alliances across the ocean in East Africa. And we've begun to do that a little bit with Arab countries. And basically, India needs to control the Indian Ocean. Long ago, I came up with the idea of Pax Indica. And I bet I'm the first person to use that in modern times because I couldn't find anybody else using that.
I thought Shashi Tharoor had a book by that name.
Yes, he took it from me.
But did you send him a letter? Yes.
No, I did not. I probably should have, because I can prove that I was the first person who used it by just looking at Internet archives. But, Shashi, being who he is, has now grabbed that word. But Pax Indica in the Indian Ocean, that is sort of our natural destiny, and we need to not shrink away from that responsibility, because this is I think in geopolitical terms, there were these concepts of rimland and heartland. Heartland is the big Eurasian continent, and China has made a lot of moves to essentially bind itself very strongly into that. And there is a gentleman named Bruno Messias a former Portuguese foreign minister whom I'm kind of chummy with, and he's been an evangelist about the idea that Eurasia is now a unitary thing and that China has, along with Russia, a stranglehold on that. But against that, there is the concept of rimland, which I think an American strategist named Mackinder, if I'm not mistaken, came up with. And the idea is that more important than the heartland is the littorals of an ocean. And that's precisely where we are, because we bestride the Indian Ocean like a colossus. And if only we can turn that geographical advantage into something that is meaningful economically, militarily, etc., I think we're in the game. And in that context, I mentioned the strategic intent. I have no idea exactly what strategic intent Prime Minister Modi has in mind. However, in my opinion, we need to aspire to be the third pole, because there are two poles right now, the Americans and the Chinese, and the other potential people or the other potential poles are, one is the Soviet Union, and sorry, not the Soviet Union, but its successor, the Russians, and the other is the EU. Unfortunately, neither really has the capability, because in my opinion, the Russians are a declining power. I don't know if you're aware of this. Demographically, they're imploding.
Yes,
Russia, which is, they're 13 times the size of Pakistan, but their population is less than Pakistan's and it's shrinking. The Russians are simply not having enough children. And what this means is that eventually the Chinese are already making some demographic moves into Siberia. Well, they'll just move in. They fought a brief war across the Amur River some years ago. And I think this time, if there's another war, the Russians are going to be outclassed. So I think Russia is to be counted out, despite what people think of Putin and all the fuss that the Americans make about Russia's influence. I think they're not really in the picture. And if you look at Europe, of course, is an even bigger economic zone than America, but it's so badly divided. And the fact that, the Germans have their problems, their economy is not doing so well. The French, Macron made some statements recently that were really kind of disturbing to a lot of people. And then the fact that the British are leaving now, I don't know if the fact that the British are leaving is good or bad for the European Union. In fact, I could argue that it's good for the European Union because they're kind of, very badly declining power as well. And they used to have these delusions of grandeur. But anyway, I'm of the opinion that neither the Soviet, I keep saying Soviet, neither the Russians nor the Europeans really have a proper intent. And so this gives an opportunity to India to be that third pole. And for that, what do we need to do? We need to find friends. We need to find a whole bunch of other countries that want our leadership and are willing to listen to our story. And there is more to it. The world is now recognizing that, this unending sort of race for growth, more GDP, more money, more cars, more whatever, more guns. This is not realistic. We have a limited planet, and we have to, in terms of global warming and resource depletion, etc., we need to have a new paradigm. And in that paradigm, India could be a leader, because the paradigm for both the Chinese and the Americans, despite all their other differences, their structures, their top-down approach, their democracy versus authoritarianism, etc., all that notwithstanding, the Americans and the Chinese both have this mantra of more, more, more. Yes. They want to have more. India is the only country, the only civilization, and this is true across all our dharmic civilizations and other dharmic, all our dharmic thought processes, whether it's Jain or Buddhist or Hindu. We have the ability to say enough. This is enough, okay? And this is reflected even in our traditional 4 stages of life, right? Yes. We have Kaumara, and then you have Yavana, and then you have Vanaprastha. And what is Vanaprastha? It's a stage in which you're saying, I have done my bet. I have raised my family as a householder. Now I'm going to retire and I'm going to give things away. And this is a story, a narrative that I keep mentioning. And, Rajiv Malhotra, whom you know, has also been talking about that. The grand Indian narrative is one where we can say enough. We don't need to be like Americans, profligate users of energy and big cars and all sorts of things, but we can have a perfectly decent and fulfilling life with not that much by way of uh, possessions. And this idea now strikes a chord with a lot of youngsters because you talk about the gig economy where you're not an employee, and you talk about the sharing economy where instead of buying stuff, you just rent it and use it so that your impact on the planet is limited. So I think, I've gone a lot away from Dr. Jaishankar's speech, but I think there is a window of opportunity for us wherein we can actually come up with not only the economic and military story, but also the narrative that can lead us to being the third pole. And in terms of strategic intent, I think we could even go further. There is really no good reason why we have to confine ourselves to thinking we'll be the third largest economy. Why not the second largest economy? In fact, why not even the first largest economy? Why can't we do that? Because the Chinese have made this very powerful intent known, saying that by the year 2050, we want to be the number one economic, military, etc., sports, etc., power in the world. Why can't India say, hey, by the year 2050, we can also aspire to be that? It's not a simple thing to get there. It's a stretch goal. We have to do some out of the box thinking to get there, but it's not impossible. It's not that that's laughable. In some 1970 or something, if India had said we're going to be the number one economy in the world, that would have been laughable. In 2019, it is no longer laughable. We're going through a rough patch right now, but I think it's not completely out of the picture to think of ourselves as being the number one economy in the world.
Absolutely, Rajiv, you're right. India is now enjoying, or India has now islands of excellence. What you need is a complete land should be of excellence, and then India would be a real competitor. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts, Rajiv, and we'll be back with more such interesting conversations.
Thank you very much, Sri, for having me, and good luck with taking this channel forward and making it as an excellent alternative channel, as you said a few minutes ago. Thank you.
Absolutely, and we are trying various things. We've been very influential in trying to help the British Indians navigate the process through whom to select for the upcoming at the upcoming election. So we are doing a lot of stuff. Everything is facts based. It's apolitical. You have to make the decision. We will place the facts in front of you. Thank you very much.